Hi, in this video we are going to talk about how do you create a blank project and how do you set the start date of the project. So as discussed earlier, you can create projects from templates, but sometimes you might need to create a project from the very scratch, so a blank project. So as soon as you open Microsoft Project from your program files, you will come to this view from where you can select a template or a blank project. So I'll select a blank project here. As soon as I create a blank project, this is the view that I get, wherein I have no data, I have no tasks, and by default it takes your current date, which is September 13th, as the project plan start date here. So what I'll do, I'll say make changes in the start date. Now to make changes in the start date, what you need to do is that just go to your project tab. If I go to project tab and then click on project information, if I click on project information, there I have an option of setting the start date. So let's say I set the start date as September 11th. So I can set the start date as September 11th, and now based on the activities and the sequencing and their respective durations that I give, along with resource constraints and availability, my end date will be, the finish date will be calculated by the project file itself. However, if you see in this file, I cannot set the finish dates. Finish date is disabled because it will be calculated by the project. Because if you now scroll down to the third option which I have, is called schedule from. Now if I just expand this drop down, it shows you can schedule from project start date or you can schedule from project finish date. So if I schedule from project start date, which is by default, then the software will allow me to enter the start date, and the finish date will be calculated by the software itself based on the duration, the activities, the sequencing that I have. Whereas if I just change it to project finish date, then the start date will be disabled. Then here in this case I need to set the finish date and then do a back calculation, and the software will tell me which should be the start date, or the project should have been started or not. Now one pitfall which many project managers commit here is that one mistake, that they schedule from finish date, because every project has a deadline and they think that scheduling it from a finish date will help them to meet that deadline, will help them to keep a track of that deadline. That's okay, but what will happen, let's say I set it from a finish date and I start entering the activities, I start entering the duration. So I might come to a schedule wherein the start date might be much earlier than today when I'm creating the plan. So the project, before it started, it might show a delay in the project. So that is something which I don't want. So what I'll do, I'll go by practical sense. So I'll just schedule it from start date. So since I started working on the project today, so I'll set it as today as the start date, and allow the software to calculate the finish date, and then make some adjustments in my schedule so that I meet the expected finish date, and I can keep a deadline. We'll talk about deadlines later on in the topics. So how do you set a deadline? So I can meet both the ends. Like today I started working on the project, I'll start creating the plan, and I can set a deadline to the last task of my project so that I can meet the end timing as well. So I recommend that all schedule from start date. It will help you to give a clear picture of the project, where you exactly stand. So I'll set the start date here. Then you have other options like current date. Current date by default will take your system date. Then I have status date. This is generally required for EVM calculations, earned value management calculations. Calendar by default is the calendar standard which is applied. If you make any changes in the standard calendar, it will automatically get reflected in your project file. If you are creating a new calendar, we'll discuss project calendar in the future topics. If you can create a new calendar, then make sure you go ahead and apply this in your project on the project information tab. And then you have priority. This is generally required when you have multiple projects working in a enterprise environment. Then you might want to set a priority for the project. So this is how you set the start date of the project, and click OK. Now always make sure that you also save your file, so that all the changes that you are making in your project file does get saved, and recommended is that you save the file in the project name. So you can go to file, click on save as, then select the location in which you want to save the files. Let's say in desktop I want to save it. So let's say my project is a software development project, so I'll write it as software development project and click on save. So as soon as I click on save, if you see at the top, the name of the file has come in, software development project. And one thing I would like to show, that if you go to the format tab, and there is an option called project summary task. If you click on this, then the same name that you have done here, the name by which you have saved the file will appear at the top, the line 0, which is the project name, the project file. So this is the, by default it will take the file name. You can make changes here. So one change I would definitely like to make is that I made a spelling mistake here of development. So I'll just go ahead and make changes here. So I'll just double click it, and I'll make sure that I have proper correct spelling of mine. So software development project. So however, making changes here doesn't mean the change will also reflect at the top of the project file name. So you might also later on would like to change the file name to any. So you can keep the file name, maybe the project code or something, and then you can, by default it will take the same as the project summary task, and later on you can change the project summary task. You cannot enter the duration of the start or finish of the project summary task. It will depend on the activities that you create in your project. So make sure you save it by clicking on Ctrl S. And so this is how you set up the project start date, and then subsequently you will start planning in your project. So that's it for this topic.